Earlier this year, I created a video of me creating this dust collection system here. So it was extremely popular, but everybody was commenting about the fine dust. But as you can see right here, I just have the exhaust going to the outside. I'm here in Florida, don't have to worry about heating. So I realized that people up north are really concerned about the heating, and quite frankly, it would help save on my AC bill down here in Florida. So I've got 7 drops here. I've got 2 floor sweeps, I've got a drill press, I got my planer, I've got my miter saw, my table saw, and my laser all hooked up. The pipe runs throughout the whole shop. Well, I wanted to make sure that I did not lose any of the effectiveness because, as you can see, I'm running quite a distance here with this dust collection system. So what I did was I rigged this 5-gallon bucket up here on the end of the pipe. I put in my meter here so that I could get a baseline. Just how well does this system work right now? So I mounted this. I left it the whole time that I was working on this project so it didn't move. And as you can see, we're averaging about 629 feet per minute of the airflow. And it drops between 610 and 629, and it keeps fluctuating there. But that was our average. So now we've got a baseline. So let's go ahead and add a filter to this system, and let's see just how much I lose. So the first thing that we have to do is take off the clamp and remove the hose, and then take off this little adapter plate that goes from the square of the housing to the round of the hose, and get rid of that so that we can have a place to bolt our new little airbox to. When I built this system, I was never planning on adding a filter to it. So I put it over here in the corner trying to save as much room as possible. So it makes it where I'm going to have to make this airbox kind of a funny shape just so I can fit it in the area that I have. So what I did was I took a measurement and figured out just how much space do I actually have to work with here. I then took a piece of cardboard, cut it out, and that way I knew how much space I would have and set it up into the area. Took my pencil from underneath and drew around the edge of the housing because this box is going to have to come in from the top and be able to slide down into place. So I have to make sure that it has room to fit. So now that I have the housing marked, I brought in the filter to set it in place. And then I'm also going to mark on the top of my piece of cardboard here, right where I want the filter to set. And that way, when I go ahead and cut out my template, I will make sure that I have a big enough board that my filter can fit on it, but also that it will fit and be able to slide down below the housing. So as you see, there's a big old gasket here on the bottom of this filter. So that gasket has to sit on top of the airbox, but the extra filter does not necessarily need to be over the airbox. So I just go ahead and find the center of where the filter is going to sit at. And then I take my compass and I set it to 9.5 inches. That's the internal opening of this filter. And then I kind of mark around where my 9.5 inches is so I know where the opening of the filter goes. I then just go ahead and cut out the hole and place it on top of the filter just to make sure that it fits and I haven't made any mistakes yet. I then just go ahead and start cutting out around where the housing is, and so I can dry fit this and make sure that it's going to fit. So I take my templates. I use them to set the fence on my table saw rather than measuring since I know my template's good. And I take this piece of scrap of 1/2 inch plywood that I have. I go ahead and make me one long strip. Then I use my templates again to set my fence and rip that down into 2 separate pieces so they're exactly the same size. It's going to be the top and the bottom. Then you see me run back. I take a measurement and it's 6.5 inches on the flange. So then I go ahead and rip me out a couple of strips, 6.5 inches, so I can make the sides to my box. I place my template on top of the piece of wood I just cut and mark out. So I know that it has to be at least this amount cut out so that it will fit below the housing. However, I don't necessarily have to have all these complicated curves and stuff. So I just mark a straight line to make sure that I can fit it past the housing. So I just use my little track saw here. That way I can plunge down and ease right up to the exact spot in my line. And I know that I've got a good straight line because when I set up the system, that flange is not 90 with the wall. That's at a slight angle. So I can't cut this on my table saw because it would be skewed. All right, so I'm done with the tape measure. Everything else is just going to be custom to, making this box. So this one is going to be 90, and my other two sides are also going to be 90. The rest of everything's going to have angles on it. So I go ahead and mark these where I can cut them all at one time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and chop these boards up real quick, but then I realize, the dust collector's down. So I've kind of gotten spoilt. And man, I'm going to be so glad when I get the dust collector finished back up and get it back online. All right, so what I do here is take my little 23 gauge pin nailer. Now, if you don't have a pin nailer, that's okay. You can just use a screw. But what I'm trying to do here is just temporary fix these boards together, but I want to be able to take them back apart because this is not my final assembly. I just need to get my measurements. So I go ahead and just shoot a couple of little pin nails in. And then once I have all the boards that were cut at 90 together, then the fun's about to start. I don't know about you, but forever I always had problems figuring out this angle. So I went and got me one of these miter protractors. And as you see, it's got two sets of numbers. One is if you're cutting two boards to equal that angle, or if you're cutting one board. And so then you just go ahead and set it. The thing set for one board, 14 degrees. I set my miter saw on 14 degrees, and then I go ahead and rip that 14-degree angle on the end of this piece of board here. So I want the other end of the board to come up here and in parallel with the outside wall. So I go ahead and mark a line at 90 degrees off this front. Then I set the board that we just cut up tight because my angles fit perfectly in the front. And then once again, I just mark where I want it to end at right here. After I mark it, then I grab the miter saw protractor again, get my angle, and we're back over to the miter saw. Okay, and just like that, we are finished with all of our angle cuts. All we have left is just that one little 3-inch piece, and it's 90 on both sides. So I go ahead and take the pin nailer, nail these last two pieces of the sides in place. So this is the moment of truth. Is this thing going to fit in or not? Well, on the sheeting on the back wall, it's stapled there. And so it kind of caught on a little staple, but it fits perfectly nice and snug. I just had to kind of bump it down just a hair to get it to go into place. But that means that we're going to have a nice tight fit and we're not going to have to worry about any kind of air leakage, which on this side wouldn't matter if we had an air leak as far as the suction, but it would then put the fine particles in the air, which is exactly what we're trying not to have happen. So now that we know that it's going to fit, it's time to take it all back apart. Since we put it together with the pin nails do not have heads on them, so the boards will just slide right up off of there. Once you slide the boards apart, you can take a pair of pliers that's got a rounded head. I use a Cobra pliers, and then you can just kind of roll those pins right out of there. If the pins do break off, just a little tap, it'll come back down into the wood, and you don't have to worry about it. Once we get it apart, so we need to cut an opening for the flange where the air can actually fit into the box, then glue it all up. And this time I'm going to go back with actually using 18 gauge brad nails because I want it to hold nice and tight. The glue, once it dries, would be more than enough, even probably with the pin nails, but I'm going to go ahead and use 18 gauge nails for the final assembly. So I'm going to cheat here doing the top. So once I have it all glued together and the bottom and the sides up, I'm going to take the top, I'm going to line it up, put some glue around the edges, and then I'm going to go ahead and nail it where the boards are up flush with the edge. The ones that are going across in the middle, I'm not going to worry about. I'm just going to get a flush cut router bit, and I'm going to go ahead and run that router bit across there, and then it's going to be cut exactly to the size, and then I'll hit that front edge with a couple of nails. I use my Craft circle jig cutter here, and I just set that to 9.5 inches and go ahead and cut out the hole. And then once I have that hole cut out, I take a little piece of sandpaper and make sure the edges are nice and smooth. I take 4 little blocks of wood that are about an inch and a half tall and mount those to the inside edge of the circle, and that gives an alignment for the filter. And this thing came out perfect. The filter fits on it with no problem, but yet there's no movement. I was going to put some sort of retainers for the filter, but because this filter is so heavy and with that big gasket on the bottom of it, I find that it's sitting on there nice and flush and it's making an airtight seal, so I don't even need to worry about any kind of retaining system. So I go ahead and I put a coat of paint on this. And the reason I'm putting the paint on here is because I don't want the dust to stick to it. It says a shop. I do a ton of work in here. And, not every tool that I use has dust collection connected to it. So if I'm using a handheld router or something, it does put some dust in the air and then it'll settle on stuff. So when that happens, I turn my filters on. I've got a air filter system in here and I'll go take a blower blow all the shelves and everything down, get all that dust out of the nooks and crannies, and then once it sucks, either it'll suck up into the filter system or it'll land on the floor, and I can sweep it into the floor sweep. So at this point, there's really not much that can go wrong. I'm thinking, all right, so let's put the box in. If the box fits, we're golden. And what do you know? A little bump and it goes right in where it's supposed to be. And then once I get it in, I go ahead and run my screws through the flange, and then I reach inside and go ahead and put a couple of screws to the wall just to help support this filter because that filter is pretty heavy. So all in all, the system looks fantastic. I got the filter on here. It doesn't take up any more room than what it did before. It looks great. I couldn't be happier as long as it works. That's the only thing. So the reason I was hesitant to do this before because I didn't want to restrict the airflow. So I was really shocked when I came over here. I opened up the gate, I hit the button, I looked down. I've got 649. Before we were only at 629. So I'm like, what? What's going on here? And then I traced it down and figured out that adapter plate that we took off in the very beginning that takes that big square hole down to the 6-inch round. If you look at it, it's restricting a lot of the airflow space. So by taking that adapter off and making that big hole open up and going into that 9.5-inch filter, we actually are improving the airflow. And so more air is actually able to escape the system, which is increasing the suction power. So if I had known this, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have done this from the get go. I was just so worried that the filter was going to restrict the airflow. But as you can see it, we're hitting 629, 649, whereas before we were 610, 629.